Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing the plight and the welfare of Israel's Arab population, which represents 20% of the total population of the State of Israel. The Arab population is made up of Muslims, Christians, and Druze. And in this program today, we'll be discussing the plight of the Druze community, plus also the problem Israel has in many cases with a growing Islamification of Israel's Muslim Arab population and their association with the Palestinian cause. We'll also be discussing how Israel's enemies claim that Israel is in a racist and apartheid state, and yet Israel's Arab minorities enjoy religious and cultural freedoms, the right to assembly, the right to parliamentary representation, and Israel's parliament in the Knesset today. And the Druze have made an incredible contribution to Israeli society, serving at the highest level in Israel's military forces, plus also serving in the diplomatic sphere. And it's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Zayden Atashi, who is a former member of the Israeli Knesset and former Israeli diplomat. Zayden, it's an absolute pleasure to have someone of your caliber on the Middle East Report today.
Thank you, likewise here. It's an honor to be on this program too.
Thank you. And Zayden, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your background. Reading your biography, you've served at the highest level in the Israeli Foreign Ministry. You've been a diplomat and a member of Israel's parliament, the Knesset. Can you share with our viewers your story about how you came to serve Israel on the most highest level of government?
You see, since my boyhood, I believed that under the democracy of Israel, all citizens can certainly place their demand and their claims to the government as long as the basic rights of freedom and the civil rights can allow that. So before I came to the foreign ministry and the Knesset, I did so many things. First of all, I was educator among the Arab youth. It's not only the Druze. We established a movement attached to the Histadrut, the labor union of Israel, and I served there to breed Arab leadership, Arab Israeli leadership among the Arabs. It was a very wise and successful step by the Israeli government and the labor union. Then I decided to continue my studies at the Hebrew University, and I was very active in the students' body in Jerusalem and in Haifa before that. And I always said that Arabs, non-Jews, must be part of the Israeli political, diplomatic structure and also the decision-making process. As a young man. So that was one of the, then I joined the Israeli television, like this station, and also I was reporting on Arab, as you said, plight and welfare. It's not only plight, it's also welfare. And from there, I have been chosen because of this record that I just mentioned. I was offered to be the first non-Jewish diplomat in 2,000 years of Jewish history. That's what they described it, at least. So I was flattered to be the first diplomat. And I went to New York. I had a great success compared together with my other diplomats, either in New York, which means in the United States, then United Nations. When I came back to Israel after 5 years, I decided to go into politics. And there was a liberal party. And I exactly was one of those who were placing or putting the foundations for that party, because it was liberal. And I have been raised as a liberal man. So, and we won 15 seats in the Knesset, and I became, for the first time, as the youngest Druze member ever in the Knesset. And from that time, I felt that through the Knesset, you can do so many things. You can improve the situation of your community, Druze, and of your people, the Arabs in Israel, and certainly to work for the welfare of the State of Israel and the security, and to make or to try to conduct some kind of mediating peace between Israel and our neighbors.
And how does your community feel towards you serving at becoming the first Israeli diplomat, and also serving in the Israeli parliament, representing their interests at the heart of Israel's democracy in the Knesset?
You know, any pioneering work, it would bring an honor to the community when their son or one of their people would be nominated to such a position, either in the diplomacy or in the Knesset, especially if we have the courage, and myself have the courage, to present the Druze problem, which were never presented in the Knesset in the proper way, in the democratic way. So myself, as was educated in Israel under this liberal democracy and the laws of Israel, I was able to present them with great courage and with no barriers. This is how I improved the situation of the Druze community, and certainly I contributed to the rest of the Arab community in Israel who are citizens, because I represented many of their problems, whether individual or local or regional. And I bridged many gaps between the Arabs and the Jews. Because I believe that you cannot stand aloof and say, I am Arab, I don't want to contribute to the society. When you do that, nobody will pay attention to you. The country will continue to operate and do work, and you are standing. You cannot wait until somebody gives you your rights. You have to work in order to obtain those rights. This is exactly what I believe at the time, and I still believe the same thing.
And also, can you tell us about the Druze community in Israel and your religious beliefs?
In Israel, we have today 130,000 Druze. That's compared to 1 million Druze in Syria and 500,000 Druze in Lebanon. Now, so the total number of the Druze community in the Middle East is about 1.5 million. Just to talk about the religion will tell you how we feel in Israel, or others feel in Syria and Lebanon.
Sure.
Our faith speaks about reincarnation, which means the pillar or the foundation of that faith is reincarnation. That means that a Druze dies and his soul enters immediately to a Druze newly born baby, to a Druze family somewhere in the world. That means that the Druze spirit or soul circulates among the Druze and do not enter any other body. So this is one. The second one, and then we will reach the conclusion why. The second one, we do not convert, or we do not conduct any conversion, not inside the Druze or outside the Druze. So it's very close community, but it is very open to the society. When I'm telling very close religiously or spiritually, but we are part of the big world, either in Israel or overseas. The third dimension, we do not conduct mixed marriages. Anyone who converts outside or marry outside, which means Druze who marries outside, they cannot live anymore in a Druze society. They have to leave the Druze place or their birthplace or their town to other place. This is the social sanction. Then we are absolutely against polygamy. We can marry one wife at the time, and divorce is absolutely allowed in the Druze faith, and you can remarry, and your divorced former wife can remarry again, but not with each other. That's it. It's disconnected. The third thing, that we are mountain dwellers.
Yes. Mountain
dwellers because of historical and physical and the spiritual security and defense. The fifth and this is the most important thing, we have no national aspiration to establish a Druze state. Not in Israel, nor in Lebanon, neither in Syria. This is why we believe that the state of Israel is our soil and our land, or our motherland, and the Druze in Lebanon believe that Lebanon is their land and their soil and their destiny, and so the Druze in Syria. We certainly care for each other. Now, if you believe that you belong to the land, you have to be loyal to the land. You cannot betray the land. And you have to ensure relations with those who rule that land. In the meantime, or since 1948, when the State of Israel was established, they extended full Israeli citizenship to all the non-Jews, Druze, Muslims, and Christians. So if I have the Israeli citizenship, I have to do my best in order to be active in Israel and to improve the situation of the citizens, no matter to which denomination or religion they belong. As I said earlier, you cannot stand aloof. You are not in solitude or isolation. You are in an active society. So the Druze believe that they wanted, the Druze, not all the community, the leadership, wanted to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces in order to be able to claim more rights on equal footing like the Jews who serve in the army. And this is what the Druze did. This, of course, gave them a great recognition in the eyes of the Jewish majority. And I'm talking symbolic recognition, but it's very important in the tradition of the Middle East, even if it is symbolic. So people would like to be officers in the army, commanders, high-ranking officers, which we have, and go to school. We started to go to school, compulsory education, not only for the Druze. From now on, I'm talking about all the rest. Israel offered free and compulsory education to all the Arabs in Israel and the Jews together. Arabic and Hebrew are two official languages of the State of Israel. Compulsory medical care for all the citizens of Israel, including the Arabs. And I heard you saying they have representation in the Knesset, free election, whether within a political Zionist parties or independent Arab parties. So they have representation, free assembly, free speech, free movement. And the most important thing, no one can claim that Israel imposed any limits on religious activity to the variety or the mosaic of the components of the Israeli society, whether he is Muslim or a Christian or a Druze, as long as they do not use religion in order to destabilize certain aspects or the stability in the State of Israel. So the Druze behaved like belong to the land, and we have no alternative. The Druze never left their country, never left their soil for any reason, but especially if they are under oppression, they wouldn't leave. They will react, but in order to react, and in the Middle East, they don't know many languages. The language of intolerance is there, definitely. So the Druze wanted to be in the safe side, and this is why they did not want to establish a Druze state, and they have no aspiration for that, because Syria is theirs, Lebanon is the other Lebanese Druze, and Israel is mine as well.
Amazing. It's incredible hearing that from your own words, Zayden. And also, you've served, like we said earlier, you've served at the highest level in terms of Israeli diplomacy. You've served as a parliamentarian in Israel's parliament, the Knesset. You've even served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. But what are your views on Israel as a nation?
It is not only views. It is a recognition of the other's right. It's not me only. The Zionist movement through their activity, obtained international recognition to establish two states in Palestine. One is a homeland for the Jewish people, and one for the Arab Palestinian people. Unfortunately, the Arabs denied that resolution of the United Nations. It was war in 1948. Very sorry to say, most of the Arabs left the country to become refugees in the Arab states. And the state of Israel started to build itself, to construct the infrastructure for a modern state. So I recognize the homeland of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, as well as I recognize and even struggle for the right of the Palestinians to build their state on that part of Palestine, so far and until now. So because I believe in human dignity, and I believe in people have to be sovereign if they need to be that way. So I think that Israel has to continue to be a Jewish state with a clear majority and with clear Arab minority, which is the current one that we are speaking about. Why? Because I believe that the minute that two nationalities and two religions living in the same area, when both reach the balance of demography, 50%, 50%, more or less, there will be clashes. There will be conflict. There will be many claims and demands for equal rights. No nationality and religion together will give equal rights to the other in the Middle East, which means that the Middle East never experienced that kind of life. So I would like Israel to continue to be a democracy, free country for all its citizens, Jewish state with full rights for the Arabs, which are there according to all the laws in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. All of them are equal. But in daily practical life, you certainly cannot obtain 100% equality to all the components of the Israeli society, including many Jewish minority and segments, Jewish, who still say we are not equal to the majority. We are not equal to the other Jews. It's a matter of time. Now, the Israeli-Arab conflict cast many shadows on the status of the Arabs and the Israeli-Arab-Jewish relationship. I mean, the whole conflict in the Middle East. But the minute that peace will come and Palestinian state will be established, and I hope soon, in that part of the world, and the two countries will have a mutual recognition, the Palestinians will have overwhelming Palestinian Arab majority, and also Israel as an independent state will have the same thing. I think all the bridges will be built to cross above them and to make that reconciliatory events and peace in that area.
Well, one of the problems we've got, haven't we, with the protracted Middle East peace process is that both sides, there needs to be reconciliation and there needs to be a genuine peace. Now, on Israel's side, Israel's offered peace to the Palestinians, and every time they've rejected that peace. And instead of creating that cultural framework to move forward and to accept a Jewish nation, what's happening, certainly in terms of Palestinian education and certainly in terms of the Palestinian politics, is to indoctrinate their people with hatred and violence towards Israel, rejecting Israel's right to exist. So how can there be mutual recognition and peace when one side is desperate for peace and the other side doesn't want peace?
Just a small correction, which is very essential, that you just mentioned. The Arabs accepted the peace, and they started the peace process, and they signed it, and they wanted it. But unfortunately, from 1994 until now, the process was shaky. Why? We have quite very crucial reasons. One is the establishment of a Jewish settlements in the West Bank on Arab lands. One. The second one is the terror from the other side toward Israel and the Israeli statehood or stability, and the increasing of the nationalistic or the ultra religious Islamic movements, and the increasing of the Israeli ultra right. I want to be very honest.
Sure.
And I'm not Jewish, but I'm trying to be genuine. Those groups who compose very small minority are making the big noise and being a great or the blocking stone to advance for peace. Now, if the Arabs in that area expect that Israel will meet all the demands, there will be no peace. And if Israel will expect that the Palestinians will accept all its demands, there will be no peace. This is exactly the situation where we are now. People are asking for the impossible from both sides. So Israel has to make genuine and great and painful concessions, as well as the Palestinians have to make the same thing. And at that point, both will proceed in order to meet in a very certain, genuine point.
But my question is there that genuine desire for peace? You talked about earlier the problem with the settlements, but if you look at the whole Judea-Samaria, the West Bank, it is actually the biblical heartland of the Jewish people, with Hebron, with Bethlehem, that's known and quoted in the Bible, that the Jewish people have more of a historical claim to those cities than they do Tel Aviv or Haifa. And yet Israel is prepared to sacrifice that in terms for a peace. On the other side, certainly since every opportunity they've had to create that peace, has launched a terror war against Israel and against the Jewish people.
I said these are the components to block the peace process. I said it very differently. But I said also something very important. I said all the demands of the Palestinians will not be met by Israel. And I said all the demands of Israel will not be met also by the Palestinians, which means we need concessions, which means not all the demands can be met mutually on both sides. We have to be realistic, and we cannot use the Bible to establish another settlements. We are in a very new reality in Israel and in Palestine. And I think if we just leave the Bible, rest in peace for a while, and leave these all ideologies in both sides, on both sides, because as long as the Palestinians say, but they do not say it, both parties signed the peace process in 1994, I think, which means the hope was there. The desire was there, the intention was there, the determination were there. Those splinter groups on both sides were planting mines under those who were marching toward peace. And there are Palestinian elements, and there are Israeli elements, and the majority, who need to go and to achieve that kind of peace. But if you want me to say that the Middle East, the absence of peace is not because of Israel there. I mean, that's another dimension I'm using now. The Middle East did not experience peace in full peace, comprehensive, lasting, and just peace for 2,000 years. So it's not only Israel, the elements that you spoke and I spoke. The Islamic movements who use Islam. Islam is very genuine religion, as long as they do not use it to achieve political aims. So the Bible is very genuine. They shouldn't use it to achieve political aims. We are in a civil society, both Muslims and the Jews, and I think we can live together.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And that's the aspiration of
that's the aspiration, the hope,
Israelis,
and
Jews.
the attempts and the seriousness of both leaderships. Israel leadership and the Palestinian leadership, which means we shouldn't miss this opportunity. Even if we pay, even Prime Minister Netanyahu said 3-4 times, I am going to take, in this cause of the peace, a serious and painful decisions. The Palestinians said the same thing. It is very unfortunate that some way on the road, something is again hindering that kind of peace. But again, we are hopeful, and we aspire for that. And really we are trying to inspire our people in Israel and also in Palestinians to come with new alternatives or with more alternative, but the main thing is to make painful concessions, as Netanyahu said, or as Mr. Abbas said, the Palestinian president, without and disregarding the very extreme groups in Israel or the very extreme groups among the Palestinians.
But isn't there a great danger? I mean, if you look at Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, that was followed by Hamas launching missiles at Israeli southern towns and cities when Israel moved forward for peace. And if Israel does the same, isn't there a great danger, particularly with the rise of Hamas within the Palestinian territories, that Israel may make peace with Mohammed Abbas and Fatah today, but tomorrow Hamas come to power in a coup d'etat, or they come to power through democracy and elections. They refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist. They call for genocide against the Jewish people in their covenant charter. So isn't there a great danger that Israel could make dangerous moves for peace that would sacrifice her security?
I said both have to make it. But you took the withdrawal from Gaza as an example. It's not the example. It was unilateral. If I was a prime minister at the time, instead of Sharon, I wouldn't withdraw on my own. I need commitments. And I need international guarantees. And I need Arab guarantees. And I need Israeli guarantees. He did it with nothing. He just uprooted, unfortunately. Not unfortunately because he uprooted it. He uprooted it without conditions of peace with the neighbors. So he did it on his own. This is why Israel is now paying that kind of price. So we have to defend that area. So what I'm saying is both have to take risks. And you cannot be only brave while you are fighting. You have to be brave while you are also approaching peace. New proposals, new initiatives, new concessions. It's painful, but it will work. I'm definite.
But my concern with this one is that we do want to see peace. I mean, that is the goal of Israel and the Middle East. So I'm not an advocate against peace.
There is no nation in the world like the Israeli nation who is striving to make peace.
But if, for example, the Palestinian leadership are not preparing their people for peace, if it's only done at a governmental level, it's not done at a grassroots level, then it's going to take generations for there to be a resolution of the conflict, surely. And if you're going to move forward with the peace process, it's so important to have that grassroots support and momentum for peace, rather than having it at top level and top down, as we've seen with Egypt now, with the fall of President Mubarak, and it looks like the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty that's been there since 1979 is on the verge of collapse. And the majority of the Egyptians want to end that peace treaty with Israel. So, I mean, I understand what that you're saying. I understand the cost that Israel will need to make for peace. But if the other side is not willing, how can there be moves towards peace, and how can we bring reconciliation between Jew and Arab?
Had Israel cooperated with all the ambassadors who came from the United States and to stop constructing settlements in the West Bank, I think that the Palestinians would have gone much further. much further. The problem is, and this is a problem. I mean, you cannot negotiate peace with me while sitting in West Jerusalem. I mean, the team, the Palestinian team and the Israeli team, but at the same minute, your constructors are building new settlements in the West Bank. It is very infuriating. It's very insulting. It's a matter of deprivation, or someone is lying on the other side, or on the public opinion. What I'm saying, the same thing I will say to the Palestinians. You cannot talk peace while people are trying to intrude to Israel and to kill people inside Israel. I'm thinking about terror. That's, I mean, our defense, I'm not asking the Palestinians to ensure our defense in the future. This is in our hands only. We see what is going in the Arab states.
Yes.
Now we conclude our defense and our destiny is in our hands only. No matter what the cost of peace will be there. We have to make sure that we can defend the very existence of the state of Israel under any circumstances.
Which is highly important, and the Druze community plays such a significant role in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. Why is the Druze community so committed to the defense of Israel, and why have you so integrated so much in the Israeli Defense Force?
I said, it is very basic thing in the Druze mind and the Druze culture and the Druze education and the Druze moral logic of survival. We consider this is our soil. And since our soil is inseparable part of the national soil of the state of Israel, we have to take part in order to defend it and to secure it. Because if our borders are not secured and we are not part of that security, we don't want to be blackmailed by anyone. We want to be part of the security. So because we consider our soil, we are defending our soil and our destiny, because it is part of the state of Israel destiny. I mean, it's a very basic thing in the Druze minds.
It's incredible.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
Some people are criticizing us. They don't like us because we cooperate with the leadership of Israel in the Israeli Defense Forces. What do you want me to do? So I go to the army because also our leaders in 1955 signed an agreement with the Israeli government that Jews, Druze and Circassians, Muslims, will go to compulsory service in the Israeli Defense Forces. Since then, the Israeli Druze improved their status, their economic situation, infrastructure, income, education. I mean, it is also a vehicle, not only to defend and to secure the borders of the state of Israel. I need also an economic relaxation, economic security, which we have it. Because 40% of the Druze income in Israel is from defense and defense-related industries. It's very important for the average Jews. Whether we like it or not, or parts of us like it or not. And we hope, we also strive that if we are so loyal to Israel and to the soil, we would love very much the government of Israel react exactly accordingly and don't argue with us on any piece of land regarding the ownership. But we won't fight, we don't burn tires in the streets. When we protest in a civil way. We go and talk to the people in the Knesset and the government. We exert immense pressure. And you know what? It's successful, but it's not 100%. But that's always the better alternative.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. What do you say to those who say that Israel is an apartheid state, that Israel isn't a racist state? From your experience and from your experience serving at the highest level Israeli government, of diplomacy, media, and in the army as well?
I wish if your program can invite or bring people who believe that Israel is a racist and apartheid, because those people do not know what apartheid and what racism is all about. They simply don't understand it. Israel is not a racist, and it couldn't be at all, because if it is racist, this race will be against the Jews themselves. They know all the Semites, that's racism. The Jews are Semites. The Arabs are Semites. And I don't think that Israel is racist against its own people, or the people, or the leadership, the Jewish leadership is against the Jewish people. It couldn't be. So those who issue these statements, they do not know what racism and apartheid means at all. We don't have two colors in our society. We don't have starvation in our society. We do have full civil rights, not applied all the time. Not what's that? I mean, it's not working all the time, but we have them. Each and every Israeli, if he thinks that his civil rights are offended, he has the High Court of Justice to appeal, and he will win. And there are so many courts in the High Court of Justice that the Arabs or the Jews, they won the cases in any time they will feel that there is inequality. In the High Court of Justice, nobody would appeal to say whether he is an Arab or a Jewish, I am appealing because of racism or apartheid. Because this case that I needed was not agreed upon by the relevant Israeli government. So the High Court of Justice would study the case and issue its decision almost always to the benefit of the citizen. So what kind of bring them, ask them if they give you the definition of apartheid and of racism. If the United Nations once in 1975, under blackmail of the majority of those days, decided that Israel is a racist country, I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah, they said.
Why the United Nations repealed and cancelled that decision few years later? Because they did say that it was done, this decision was done and taken under peculiar circumstances, under blackmail of oil, nationalism, and ultra-Islamism. So it's better to know what you are talking about. I mean, not you.
Absolutely.
Those who say that Israel is maybe they can say in Israel there is no equality. And in Finland there is 100% equality. And in England is there 100% equality. And in the United States 100% happiness and satisfaction to all the citizens. If we have inequalities to certain segments, doesn't mean that we are an apartheid. We are only 64 years old. You still have in the most modern Western states people homeless, sleeping in the street sides. We don't have this phenomenon at all. We don't have the kind of starvation that many segments of Western rich nations have. Starvation, poverty. We have some inequalities in a daily practical life. We have to be united in Israel, in the Knesset and outside, in order to repeal any policy which might differentiate between this and that, and not to claim that Israel is a racist or apartheid state.
Now I want to discuss with you a very sensitive issue in Israel, and this is an article that you've also done a lot of work on and you've written on it. A very, very good article here called The Islamic Arab Minority in the Jewish State. And you wrote that article 10 years ago, but it seems even more relevant now that the Israel's Arab population have gone through a process of Islamification. They identify with the Palestinian cause. They no longer see themselves as being Israeli Arabs, but Palestinian Arabs. What are the main factors that have caused this, and what are the social cohesion problems that Israel could face if this trend continues?
The article that you just mentioned, it is as a result of a long study. It's not only mine. It's not only my study. Many scholars made researches on this case. But I made it because previously I said Israel must continue to be with the Jewish majority, and I'm not afraid to say it anywhere. With Arab minority, full rights to all of them. But that movement of Islamization in Israel is part of the Arab movement. In Egypt, in Sudan, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Jordan, in Lebanon, all over the world. That's part of it. I warned, this is a warning, that the minute that you have two religions, I'm talking very clearly, Jewish religion and Jewish nationality, Islamic religion and Arab nationality, claiming the same land, and they reach demographically almost a balance of 50% each, that will endanger both parties. So I would like Israel to continue to be a Jewish state with a clear majority, while the Arabs have a full rights as a minority. Certainly, I do not want the Muslims, it's not the Muslims, the Arabs, to be 50% of the state of Israel, because by then we will conduct, I see civil war inside Israel. I prefer to fight conventional wars among or along the borders rather to have civil war in my country. And the civil wars, you saw them where? It's in Syria right now. Yesterday it was in Egypt. It's never finished. Libya is still also. All the Sudan with south, north. You know what's happening now with Nigeria? Almost every week or every month, if I want to be on the safe side, you see that this church was burned by Muslim extremists, and the other church was burned by Christian extremists, as a revenge. I don't want to be in that situation. I want to control. I want to control the conduct and the behavior of all the components of my society and country. And that I can do only with the clear majority for one religion and nation, but with full respect to the minority. And do not let them feel inferior. The Islamization in that area is part, in Israel, is part of the strength of the Islamization of the Arab states. But I cannot have it in the state of Israel because of the Jewish character of the state of Israel.
And what impact is the Arab Spring having on Israel's Arab population? Because we've seen in Egypt, the Arab Spring represented this great hope of freedom and democracy for the Arab people. And instead, it seems
they're
to have turned
represented,
into the...
but they're not achieved.
Yes. But it seems like now we're facing the Arab winter as the Muslim Brotherhood are coming to power in Egypt. Islamist parties have come to the forefront in Libya and also in Tunisia. We're seeing civil war, Syria on the verge of civil war. Isn't there a great danger that if this continues, that there could be internal, or like you said earlier, civil war in Israel?
You called it, and many other people called it the Arab Spring. It is very unfortunate. It is the Arab catastrophe. It's not spring. Because spring cannot tolerate blood. And unfortunately, what we are seeing now It's spilling much blood of each other. Brothers, co-citizens. Why? Because somebody doesn't want to resign and to give up the regime. That's one. Back to the Israeli Arabs. I think this minority, the 20% or 20% that you just mentioned, with overwhelming Islamic majority, I believe, not only think, that they are the most genuine, pragmatic minority in the whole entire area of the Middle East. They know that Israel is there to stay. And they know that if anything will happen to Israel, their very existence and very civil rights will be endangered. But they know that. Economic problems will be cracking down, just like the other Israelis, Jewish. So no one wants to sacrifice his very stability, even if he is not equal in daily practical life. Even if he's not equal, he feels. But I told you, more Jews in Israel, Jewish Israelis, feel that they are unequal than the Arabs. And if we have 1 million Arabs, or 1.1 million, who feel not equal, and not all of them, 70% fear that they are equal. You have almost the same number among the Jews who feel not equal. But this is the nature of a democracy. It's open opportunities. The more you work, the more you produce. The more you scream, the more you cannot produce anything. Go to the working power and do. And the Arabs are great builders of the state of Israel. I'm telling you. And the income, there is still dispute over certain issues, like zoning areas, disputes over land ownership. But that doesn't make the Arabs desperate. They have 12 members in the Knesset. They can do the work. They can do lobby. They can improve their situation, the Arab situation, and they have done a lot. And you have the High Arab Committee, who went to the High Court of Justice hundreds times. I think they won about, if I say 100, they won 80 cases, which is great. They don't have this thing in Egypt. They know that in case of Israel would do anything to their prime minister, under no circumstances will they bring their minister on the bed to the courtroom, like in Egypt, or kill like in Libya, or bloodshed like in Syria. We are a genuine nation. Arabs, Islam, Christian, and the Druze were very genuine citizens and very loyal. The fact that we are screaming and criticizing the government policies doesn't make the Israeli population, by and large, Arabs and the Jews, are not living together. Jaffa, living together. Lud, living together. East, West Jerusalem, living together. Nazareth, Upper, Nazareth, Lower, living together. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands. All the Galilee, they are living, Christians and Muslims together, and the Jews in the neighborhood. We are not living separately. That's the problem of those who describe Israel as a racist or where's the apartheid? You know where Haifa?
Yes or no, Haifa?
No, not you. They know where is Haifa. Let them go to Haifa and to see the mutual or the coexistence between the components of the city. Or in Akko, or in the Galilee, or in Nazareth, or in Lod, Ramle, Yafo, Jerusalem, all of them living together. Sometimes in the same block, sometimes in the same high-rising buildings. Sometimes they go to mutually to the schools.
Yeah. Zayden, we're down to the last 2.5 minutes of the program, which has been very informative and very riveting. Do you have a message for our viewers, and what is the future for the Druze living in Israel?
Our future is exactly like our past. I mean, we certainly look forward to improve our situation and our status But if peace will be achieved in the Middle East, most of the minorities of that area will enjoy the economic improvement. The environment will be cleaned. I mean, the social environment. We will witness tranquility and peace between the Druze and the others, between the Jews and the others. But the Druze, under any circumstances, would continue to be there, because we cling very strongly to the land more any other element in the whole entire world, incidentally. So that's why we are trying to be very pragmatic citizens in the state of Israel, or the Syrians for Syria, or the Druze in Lebanon for Lebanon. And let us pray, as you started, that both parties or all parties in the Middle East will achieve peace as soon as possible.
I want to thank you, Zaidan, Ashtani, for being Atashi, for being my special.
It's not familiar name in the West, so I wouldn't blame you.
You're very gracious and very kind. So thank you for being my special guest on the Middle East Report today, and thank you for educating our viewers about the plight of the Druze community in Israel and countering a lot of the lies and propaganda that's been targeted against Israel. So just want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report. I think here we have, through this program, a demonstration that Israel is not an apartheid, that Israel is not a racist state, that Israel's Arab minorities enjoy religious freedom, they enjoy political freedoms, and they are functioning,
educational.
Culture and education, exactly, and play such an important part in Israel's community and for the advancement of Israeli society, which shows how democratic and how much freedom there is in the state of Israel. And that's why it's important that we have a full and comprehensive understanding of Israel, not just about Israel's Jewish population, but also about Israel's important Arab population and the significance and the importance attached to this, as the Druze community serve in the Israeli Defense Force at the highest levels. They serve in Israel's diplomacy and diplomatic line. And we just want to thank you for watching today's program, and we pray for peace in the Middle East.
الشبيب الدرزي عادتنا الغير الأبي نعتز بروح التطوع والآصال الأبدي
نعتز بروح التطوع والآصال الأبدي نعتز بروح التطوع والآصال الأبدي
صبايا وشباب هدبي الهم العلي تزيد تزيد
صبايا وشباب
بلدنا الغالي نبيها ورح نبهداش نضويها لبلدنا الغالي نتعاطف مع اليتيم بالوحد لا خاوي ونتعاطف مع اليتيم بالوحد لا خاوي
نحن الشبيب
احنا الشبيب الدرزي عادتنا الغير الابي، نعتز بروح التطوع والاصال الابي.